In March of 1861, guests at the Exchange, the leading luxury hotel in Montgomery, Alabama, noticed that the rates were going up while the luxury was going down and the food was getting worse. A guest from South Carolina, William Porcher Miles, found the soup greasy and complained about it in letters to friends back home. Likewise, Thomas Cobb, another guest, wrote his wife in Georgia that the filth at the hotel is almost starving me. Things were even worse by early May. William Howard Russell, a newly arrived correspondent for the Times of London, wrote in his diary that 3 gentlemen and myself were crammed into a filthy room which already contained 2 strangers, and as there were only 3 beds in the apartment, it was apparent that we were intended to double up considerably. But after strenuous efforts, a little bribery and cajoling, we succeeded in procuring mattresses to put on the floor, which was regarded by our neighbors as a proof of miserable aristocratic fastidiousness. Had it not been for the flies, the fleas would have been intolerable, but one nuisance neutralized the other. These and other disgruntled guests were experiencing the growing pains of a sleepy southern town that suddenly found itself thrust upon the world stage. Immediately after arriving for a convention of 7 states that had announced their secession from the Union on the heels of Abraham Lincoln's election, delegates declared themselves a Congress and set out to form a new government. And with new governments come not just politicians like Miles and Cobb, who were members of the new Congress, but office seekers, lobbyists, military men, hucksters, vendors, journalists, and anyone looking to get in on the ground floor of a brand new country. In just a few days, Montgomery's population exploded from fewer than 9,000 residents to nearly 20,000. When the delegates first arrived in early February, Montgomery made a mixed impression. Although a New York newspaper called it a nice, tidy little southern town, a reporter from Georgia wrote that the city was sadly undeveloped and that it needs some candid, impartial, and fearless man to speak the truth and tell this people wherein they are derelict. The layout of the streets, which were well lit but mostly unpaved, was confusing, and during and after the winter rains they were a muddy mess. On the other hand, a New Orleans journalist thought the city's 2 artesian wells produced the purest and best water I have ever drunk. And there were plenty of beautiful mansions to admire since the city's whites, who were just barely outnumbered by the enslaved population, owned cotton plantations in the surrounding area, making Montgomery per capita one of the richest southern cities. Historian William C. Davis describes the Exchange Hotel as it first appeared to the delegates and to newly inaugurated President Jefferson Davis, who stayed there until Congress leased the first White House of the Confederacy. It accommodated at least 300 guests on its 3 upper floors, the ground level being given over to shops and stores. Lodging cost $250 a day, including meals, and amenities included a bar room, reading and smoking rooms, and a ladies' entrance on Montgomery Street. The dining room offered some of the best fare in Montgomery: oysters, turkey, lobster salad, cakes, fruits and nuts, candies and confections of all kinds, and an extensive and international wine and champagne cellar. With most of the delegates staying at the Exchange, its lobbies and bar rooms were where much of the new country's real business got done, even before the convention was gavelled in. And soon they got even more crowded, Davis writes. Men looking for positions hounded the congressmen wherever they went, filling the galleries sometimes and never letting up. Crowding the lobbies of the hotels and the bar rooms, they generally protested in public that they were too modest to ask for anything, but behind the scenes they pulled every available wire. Even cities joined the swell, Atlanta continuing to petition for consideration as the permanent capital and offering as inducements its good railroad communications, freedom from summer fevers, ample access to abundant supplies, and peanuts. Even as Montgomery felt the swell of all the hungry and the wire pullers swarming to her hotels and boarding houses, she knew that this boom would burst if a city like Atlanta got its wish. It wasn't just the lobbies and barrooms that were crowded with opportunists. Here's how Russell described the experience of sleeping in a packed guest room. I was glad when bedtime approached that I was not among the mattress men. One of the gentlemen in the bed next to the door was a tremendous projector in the tobacco juice line. His final rumination ere he sank to repose was a masterpiece of art, a perfect liquid pyrotechny, Roman candles and falling stars. A horrid thought occurred as I gazed and wondered, in case he should in a supreme moment turn his attention my way. I was only 7 or 8 yards off, and that might be nothing to him. I hauled down my mosquito curtain at once and watched him till, completely satiated, he slept. Keep in mind that unlike Frederick Law Olmsted, who had complained about what he saw as the shortcomings of Southern hospitality in houses he stayed in while traveling, Russell had been a war correspondent covering the conflict in Crimea, so he was used to sleeping rough. With the increased crowding came increased prices. Hal Cobb of Georgia, brother of Thomas and president of the convention, joked that the congressmen kept their pay low for fear the hotel keepers may demand it all. Davis writes that William Porcher Miles blamed the exchange's greasy soup for his heartburn and his unsettled dreams at night, and complained to friends as far away as South Carolina. They could not fail to sympathize, even if a bit tongue-in-cheek. Speaking of the offending cook and his broth, one friend responded, "How great then are the responsibilities of that important officer to the Montgomery Convention." A delegate needed cool judgment and sound digestion. Who can fairly appreciate the rights of others whose soup is bad and who has the heartburn in consequence? He even suggested that if the Founding Fathers in 1776 had a better cook in Philadelphia, then the offending phrases in the Declaration of Independence, like "all men being born equal," would not have come about. Either the convention in Montgomery or the Congress itself should hire a good cook. "Miles, it should be attended to," said his friend, "else the danger was too great. A constitution under the influence of greasy soup, conceived in dyspepsia, shaped into portentous form by the visions of night-oppressed dreams, can't do otherwise than produce a flatulency which will blow up the whole concern." Montgomery's status as a new national capital was blown up when Virginia joined the Confederacy and Congress voted to move the government to Richmond. The last of the government trains left at 8 a.m. on May 30th. Later that day, two chiefs of the Creek Nation, Chili McIntosh and M. Tidman, arrived. They had been invited to the capital as part of the Confederate effort to ally the South with the tribes of Arkansas, Texas, and the Indian Territory. Davis writes, "Somehow in the rush to get packed and away, everyone forgot those invitations. On May 30th, McIntosh and Tidman stepped off the train expecting to find the throbbing nerve center of the Confederacy. Instead, they found only sleepy, slightly dazed, and still somewhat resentful Montgomery. Confused themselves, they remained a few days. There was no problem getting a room at the exchange now. They could enjoy the fresh oysters, the abundant whiskey, the fragrance of gardens on the river's evening breeze. And when they were ready, they went to the West Point Depot and boarded a train to take them east in search of a government." How do you think you would have liked being in Montgomery during those heady few months in 1861? Have you ever spent time in an area that was experiencing a sudden population explosion, like San Francisco during the Summer of Love, Woodstock in 1969, or Beaumont, Texas after the Spindletop gusher that launched the oil boom? Let me know what it was like in the comments. And help this little channel keep growing by subscribing if you haven't already, hitting that like button, sharing with friends, and watching another one or two of my videos if you have time. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.